What's up YouTube, Dale here from Zephyr War Games. So bringing you another part of the getting back into Yu-Gi-Oh! Or getting started Yu-Gi-Oh! Basics. We've covered everything from monsters, spells, traps and extra deck. So now I'm basically going to bring you how to build a deck. So before you get started of building a deck, please check out the ban list. This is basically the list that Konami has brought in for the TCG or OCG, depending on where you're playing the game, and it tells you what cards you can and cannot have in your deck and how many of each card you can. So the standard number of cards you can have of a single card is 3, and that's a card that's unlimited. If a card is banned, you can't have any of that card in your deck. If it's limited, you can have 1 of it, and if it's semi-limited, you can have 2 of it. Obviously, Satellite Deneb at the moment is unlimited, so you can play 3 of those. So yeah, please check out the ban list before you start building your deck, just so you know what cards you can and cannot have in your deck, and how many you can. So, getting on to building a deck. Like in the previous introductory video, we said that you'd be looking to have your deck at about 40 cards. You can push this to 41, 42, give or take, depending on your build. But each kind of deck revolves around an archetype. So, for example, an archetype is Satellite. That is an archetype. It's a set of cards that work well together. So, for example, Deneb, this guy gets to search out another Satellite. This guy brings back a Satellite from the grave to the field. This guy sends a Satellite from the deck to the graveyard. And this guy brings a Satellite from the hand to the field as a special summon. So you get other archetypes like Shadow's, Burning Abyss, Cosmo, stuff like that, and they're basically a set of cards that work well together, and that's kind of the core that you build your deck around. So you would take your core build, and you can either keep it pure and just leave it with these monsters, or you can start adding in generic cards. So for example, you can have some generic cards specifically for this deck. You can have Effect Veiler, which can go in any deck at all. It really doesn't matter what deck you play with, because basically its effect is it negates an effect on your opponent's side of the field. So this kind of card can be put in any deck, and it's considered a staple card in some decks, but it is a generic card. It can be put in any deck at all. Again, with Honest, it can be put in any light deck. So any light deck, you can put this guy in it. So it doesn't need to be with Tellers, it can be with any other deck that has light monsters in it. So again, it's a generic card that can be played along with your archetype of light, and Veiler is a card that you can put in your deck no matter what it is. So that's kind of a quick breeze over on the monsters. So with Tellarknights, you can see the kind of the numbers that Tellarknights uses. Most people don't run these generic ones, they just keep it pure like this. But obviously these are just personal touches that work well with this type of deck. Onto the spells. Again, pretty straightforward. So you'll have your spells that are specific for that type of deck. So for Satellite, I've got Satellite Skybridge. So again, it's specific to this deck, it won't work in any other decks unless it runs Satellites. Then you get staple spells, and you'll notice that staple spells are mostly the more expensive cards, because these can be played in any deck, and the more important staples like this card that are played in every deck possible, they'll be more expensive. So Rigeki is at limited, so I can only play 1 in this deck, but it is a generic card that can be played in any deck at all. Reinforcement of the Army, again, it's been moved to limited, but this is specifically for a deck that plays warrior type monsters, which all the Satellites are, and that's how that one works. Galaxy Cyclone and Mystical Space Typhoon, they're kind of staples, but this is at 3, and so's this, and they're just to destroy other opponents' traps and spells, and these are pretty cheap and generic. People can run anywhere between 2 to 3 of those. Soul Charge, again, it's a generic card. It just brings back a certain amount of numbered card. It can bring back monsters from your graveyard as a special summon, but it charges you 1,000 life points per one. So again, it's a generic card, can be played in any deck. Same with MST, Mystical Space Typhoons and Galaxy Cyclones. Instant Fusion, it can be played in any deck. It depends on your extra deck. If you have a fusion monster in your extra deck, you use this and it will special summon that out for the price of 1,000 life points. It works better in some decks than others, but it can be used in most decks. It's mainly used in rank 4 decks, so as you can see, all my monsters are level 4s, apart from Effect Veiler. So all of them are level 4s, which is what my extra deck consists of. And when we get to the extra deck, I'll show you that more in full. So that's the spells there. And you see how there's quite a few generic stuff. So I mean, if you don't have a Rogeki, get a Dark Hole. They're cheap enough as well, and it pretty much does the same job if you have a clear field. But Rogekis you can pick up for about tenner now. Okay, so another generic card that can be played in any deck is Call of the Haunted. Again, it's dependent on the type of player you are as to whether or not you want to be special summoning your monsters from the grave and if you've got space or not. So Turnover Alpha, again, a more specific trap just for this deck. Fiendish Chain is another generic card. It can be played in any deck, so that's not an issue. Again, with Quaking Mirror Force, any deck. Solemn Strike, any deck. Solemn Warning, staple card. You should really be playing this in all your decks, regardless. No argument about it. Trench Tribute, again, same for Bottomless. Vanities. So all of these cards are generic cards, and they are deck staples. 9 out of 10 decks will run these 4 cards because they're so generic that everyone has them in their decks, and they're really cheap to pick up. I mean, you can get commons of all of these. I think you can get a common of Vanities, I'm not too sure. But yeah, they're all relatively cheap, and these are kind of like the main cards that you'll always have in your deck. The rest of the stuff is down to you whether you like it or not. I mean, Quaking Mirror Force I personally like, and Fiendish Chain I personally like, so that's my touches on it. Oasis of Dragon Souls is, again, it can be used in any deck, but I prefer it in... Some people don't prefer it in their decks, I prefer it in my Saturnite deck. So yeah, that's basically the traps, and that's a 40 card build right there. So a mixture of archetypes through monsters, spells and traps, and then obviously little touches with Honest and Veilers and stuff like that. So moving on to the extra deck, this is where it gets specific to your main deck. So Saturnite Trevere is specific to my Tellarknight because it requires 2 level 4 Tellarknight monsters. So that's a specific card. Ilsworn Ouroboros is generic for level 4 monsters. So if your deck, whether it's Tellarknights or anything else, if the majority of your deck is level 4 monsters, then you'll put stuff like this in your extra deck. Level 4 light, so if your deck's a light deck, then you'll run this. This one requires level 4 warriors. So if you're a warrior deck, you put that in there. This guy, it may be Saturnite Deltaros, but this guy is generic. He's 3 level 4s, so if your deck can produce 3 level 4s on the field, you'll run this guy. Abyss Dweller, another generic. Cowboy, a generic in every rank 4 deck, just because basically if your opponent has a full board but they only have 800 life points left, you bring this guy out in defense, detach a material, and you burn your opponent for 800 life points and you win. Rhapsody Berserker, again generic for rank 4s. Constellar Diamond is more for the Tellarknight deck. This is your target in your Tellarknight deck for your instant fusion. So you'd bring this guy out, and it works more because he can bring back a level 4 from your graveyard, and then you can just overlay into a generic rank 4. But you can have any other fusion cards you want in your extra deck, not an issue. Diamond Crackling, a brand new generic rank 4, very strong, 2 level 4s, that's all it needs. A second Trevere, that's fine, we've already touched on that. Bujin Tsukunomi, again, it's just for light monsters. Daiguster Animal, very expensive card because he's a generic rank 4. He's not needed, he's just like, he helps recycle your graveyard and gets you a draw off. But yeah, he's just an expensive card that most people run. You don't need to, it just helps out a lot. And then Castel, a very nice, a very cheap, great generic rank 4. So he's 2 level 4s and he basically detaches 2 materials and returns a monster from your opponent's side of the field back to the deck. So he's a great one. He came out in the 2015 tins, so he's very, very cheap. So you definitely want him if you're building a rank 4 deck. So that's it for the extra deck. Now, other decks do require, well, when you're entering a tournament and stuff like that, you would build a 15 card side deck. There's no point in me going through it specifically to you because you build it based on the current meta or what your local tournament players run. So, for example, you just find counter traps. You find traps, monsters, spells, or anything like that. You put in your extra deck that counter what your opponent is playing. So, for example, I would play Tellarknight deck, and if I was to play, for example, a Monarch deck, in my second game, I would take out cards that I don't feel are effective against Monarchs and put in cards that I do feel from my side deck. So, for a quick example, Mask of Restrict is great against Monarchs. So I would possibly take out... I can take out anything. It doesn't have to be a trap for a trap. You just need to make sure that your deck is balanced. If your deck is at 40, it must then be at 40. So it's 1 for 1 all the time. So I could take out another trap if I wanted to. So, I mean, I could take out Vanities, for example, and then put Mask of Restrict in there. You can side up to 15 cards. So you can side up. You can put all 15 cards in your side deck into your main deck. It's not something I recommend. You ideally want to be putting the 3 or 4 cards that you feel will change the way of the game. It will give you a better boost because your opponent's going to do the same. So my opponent would then put in stuff that would tackle my Tellarknights big time. So it's kind of like now I know what you're playing, I'm going to try and stop you using the cards that I can. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope you kind of get the idea of archetypes, and then generic cards that you can add to near enough any deck as long as it meets the specifics. So you wouldn't run this card in a deck that has all dark monsters. It's not worth it. It's a waste of a spot. You will find when building your deck that you're constantly tweaking over. You'll probably look at your deck will probably be anywhere from... You might get it down to about 45 cards just because you don't know what you want to put in it yet, which is fine. By all means, you can go over the number. It's not strict. Like I said, the maximum number of cards you can have in a deck is 60, but you want to be keeping your chances of drawing the cards you need at a maximum. So yeah, I hope this helped, and I hope this allows you guys to kind of build a deck. There are many, many deck profiles on our page and on other pages that help you build a specific type of deck. There are things called budget decks, which are really cheap. You can probably build the deck for about 10 to 15 quid. And that's stuff like Gradle Kaijus. They're very competitive and very strong. There's Ultimate Athletes, so UA monsters. They're very good and cheap. And there's loads of other decks that could be built really cheaply. But then if you want to... I wouldn't recommend, if you're starting off, jumping straight into the deep end and going for a high meta deck like Cosmo, because you're just going to be dropping loads of money on something that's going to be a little bit harder to pick up and get going with. So start with by all means, download like Dev Pro or Yugioh Pro, something like that, and practice online, just so you can get a feel for the type of deck you want to build, and then you tweak it to your type of play. So if you find yourself you're a more defensive type of player, then you'll probably be sitting on counter traps like these and Quaking Mirror Force. If you find you're a more aggressive player, you'll probably be sitting on more Honests and stuff like that. If you like negating your opponent's effects, you can look into decks like Psy-Frames and stuff like that are built specific to do a job. So the specific job that Tellarknights are there for is to special summon up numerous amounts of rank 4s, level 4s, and then overlay into strong level 4 extra deck monsters. So I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions, then please let me know. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe to the page, and we'll bring you many more videos to help out with this, and hopefully we'll be bringing you the slow duel for you guys to kind of see the pace of the game and go with. So yeah, cheers guys, bye.